And we begin. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to AN Productions, a channel where we discuss military history, film history, and history in general. Today, we are discussing military history. I am your host, Adam Noyce, and joining me are two good friends of mine that we met in kind of odd ways over the past few years. But joining me first up is I like calling him Fire. Fire, say hello.
Howdy.
And then there is also Sauce Boss. Sauce Boss, if you could say hello.
Good evening.
So how the hell did we meet? We met because of what was it? The Fourth New Jersey, which is a regiment that partakes in the game War of Rights. We tend to have more emphasis on trying to be as historically accurate and to the period of the Civil War than some of the regiments that play within in War of Rights. I don't know if you guys have anything to really add to that. But
we are nerds united.
Yes, I was going to say you guys definitely sometimes make me feel stupid with how much very specific knowledge you guys tend to have on things. And what was it? A while ago, I want to say it was during the anniversary, we did kind of an anniversary event kind of reenacting the Battle of Crampton's Gap from the point of view of the actual 4th New Jersey. I don't know if you want to kind of mention any of that, Sauce, since you were the one that pretty well organized it.
Well, I mean, it was really fun, first off. What I want to say is that doing research to talk about this today, I actually learned a whole lot more stuff than I knew then, and actually found out a couple things that I got wrong, or a couple of assumptions that I made that weren't necessarily right. And so I'm actually interested to explore those at some point today.
Yeah, and I'm excited to learn about this because admittedly, and this is kind of rare for one of these types of podcasts that I do, I know less about this than I like knowing. I know a decent amount about the battle that happened in Harper's Ferry, and I know a decent amount of what actually happened at Antietam itself. But there's a few of these gaps, or they're called gaps, around South Mountain that I know very little about, and that's where where this battle takes place. One of the first questions I have to ask for you guys is: some people would consider this part of Antietam, some people would consider this part of South Mountain. Which one would you consider this battle a part of?
To be entirely honest, I would consider this more part of Harper's Ferry. The entire point of the Battle of Crampton's Gap is to just have Franklin's 6th Corps go and to relieve the defenders under, I forget what his first name is, but under Colonel Miles at Harper's Ferry from McLaws's assault.
Dixon
Miles, that's the one. But the entire point of this is Franklin has a relatively big corps. McClellan knows that he needs to get Miles because otherwise, Harper's Ferry's already been lost at least once in the war. They don't want to do it again. Like we learn later whenever it happens, spoiler alert, it does get completely taken by the Confederacy again. But whenever it does get taken, it is the largest surrender by Union forces, period, at that point in history.
And I can understand...
It's a big deal.
I can understand why, because having been now to Harper's Ferry, that has got to be the most undefensible position I have ever seen.
They built this important federal arsenal in between 3 hills, 2 of which are overlooking it directly, that you can barely fucking climb.
It is the complete opposite of a medieval castle.
Yes.
Yeah, it is the worst defensive terrain possible for the actual arsenal itself. Outside the arsenal, great terrain. Maryland Heights, perfectly defensible terrain. Not from the arsenal itself, though.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that assessment, by the way. I don't think Crampton's Gap is a part of the Battle of Antietam proper. I wouldn't necessarily even say it's part of South Mountain, even though it's only within a few miles of the South Mountain battlefield. It either is part of the Harper's Ferry battle, or it just is its own engagement. It's so unique in its purpose with respect to the action at Fox's and Turner's Gap on the same day that it certainly deserves to be put in the greater context of the campaign as its own thing, in my opinion.
Okay, and I'm
Kinda
glad.
funny too,
No, go
because you
ahead.
mentioned both of those, like the Harper's Ferry and the passes up and the rest of South Mountain. They can hear literally all of this going on in all three of those places at the exact same time. So like as they're advancing into Crampton's Gap, they can hear Ninth Corps and First Corps and all of them engaging up at Fox and Turner's Gap. And they can hear the like cannonade over at Harper's Ferry at the same time. So all of these people know exactly like about the same as everybody else that there's a lot of fighting around that entire like
Well, these places are
area.
shockingly close together because I think I'm the only one in here that's actually been to this area, who's actually traveled to South Mountain, Harper's Ferry, Antietam itself, right? You guys actually haven't been yet?
I've been in the area, but not like actually to those three places.
Yeah. Okay.
I've never been in that vicinity.
I got to tell you, everything is shockingly close to each other. But
Yeah, it's like
it's also
I think
unbelievably
5 to 7 miles between each of those.
Yeah. Like everything is freakishly close together because if you just look at it on a map, you kind of have a hard time gauging distances and you're like, oh, they seem pretty spread out. But then when you actually look in on it, you're like, oh, this is why they're doing it this way. It makes a lot more sense. And also the terrain, and I want to get into this a little later when we actually start really getting into the nitty-gritty of the battle. Having seen the terrain myself, I now think I understand why the Union, in particular Franklin, why he made a couple of decisions that he did. While a lot of people who are just, like regular armchair historians might, cast a lot of blame on him, and I'm not saying he's completely blameless, but I can at least understand why he may have taken some of these decisions. So what Crampton's Gap was all a part of Lee's first invasion of the North. A lot of people, it was General Lee's idea to actually invade the North in 1862. And a lot of people remember Gettysburg. That was the big battle, right? Where, of course, the Confederacy invaded the North. But a lot of people seem to forget that Lee invaded first in 1862. They may have heard about the Battle of Antietam, and probably they only heard about it because of the Emancipation Proclamation that came as a result of the Battle of Antietam. But a lot of people just forget about the fact that Lee totally invaded the North in 1862. And a question that I want to ask for both of you is, would you know what was Lee's rationale when he was invading the North? If you guys could maybe give a couple hypotheses briefly.
Well, the very first reason is very closely related to the reason he invades in 1863 as well, in the sense that he's got to get the war out of Virginia for a little while. The armies had been in southern Maryland and in northern Virginia, mostly living off of the land for so long now. He really needs to get the war out of that area, give the farmers a chance to bring their crops to maturity so that they can have a good harvest. I mean, even in late 1862, the war's only been going on for, a year and 6 or 7 months at this point, and already you're starting to get the start of things such as food shortages in that region of the Confederacy. I think that's probably the very first reason. And I think probably the second reason is, politically speaking, he needs to go on the offensive. He has the momentum, right? And he's specifically riding on his victory at Second Manassas, or I'm Southern, so I call it Manassas, but Second Bull Run. And he needs to keep that initiative. I think that almost anybody who looks at the way Lee fights during the Civil War can understand that he is not a commander that likes to be on the back foot. His strength is in offensive operations, and I think given the opportunity, he was going to take it, and he certainly did take it.
He kind of did that in 1863 too, didn't he? He came off the success of Chancellorsville, and literally less than a month later, he was invading into Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it does kind of make sense. And I didn't even really think about the whole, hey, the farmers need to be able to grow their crops part of it. I more have thought it as we got to put pressure on Washington, and we need to get the Federals, the Union, into a position where they could earn a favorable peace as quickly as possible. Because I think a lot of people, even in 1862, knew that the Confederacy couldn't really win in a prolonged war of attrition, which is very clearly the direction in which the Civil War was going, especially after Shiloh. Shiloh happened a few months before Antietam. I think it happened in April, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. Yep. And that was the deadliest. That was deadlier than most of the wars America had fought. This one battle at the time. And the war was clearly taking a different turn than what everyone, and I do kind of mean everybody, thought it was going to be, which was going to be this quick little thing. And it certainly was turning out not to be.
So brought up the political ramifications for it, because like one thing that a lot of people kind of forget about like the Maryland campaign, that's in September of 62. In 2 months, you have the midterm elections.
Yes.
I have to imagine that Lee is thinking is like, look, if we can go and cut off Baltimore, for example, from the rest of the North, cut off Washington, maybe the like peace Democrats will get into power, and then we can actually sue for peace whenever Lincoln's on the back foot then.
Yeah,
Which
they were
Lincoln
definitely
was always on the back foot, but
I mean, and we got to remember that Lee was very close to Jefferson Davis as well. So they kind of have he has a little bit more of an understanding of some of the political stuff than probably a lot of generals did.
They certainly had a synergy that most Northern generals cannot claim to have with the administration.
Yes, especially at this time. I mean, look who's in charge of the Army of the Potomac. It's McClellan, and he fucking hated Lincoln.
He would run against him in a couple of years.
That's an understatement, I think.
He only hates him more as Lincoln like gets more involved in army politics.
Right.
Which ultimately he ends up having to get more involved in army politics, specifically because of McClellan's conduct.
Yeah, exactly. But McClellan was actually he was brought back when it came to the Antietam campaign, because Pope had replaced McClellan initially because of McClellan's meandering, quite frankly. And Pope actually had a very fire and brimstone attitude toward the Confederacy that had he been successful in and around the Battle of Second Bull Run, we may have seen something more like what we had in 1864 and 65 all the way back in 1862. Because Pope's doctrine, when he was put in charge, was very fire and brimstone. And very much, we need to bring the Confederacy to their knees, which I find very interesting. But he was horribly defeated at the Battle of Second Manassas. And he was then replaced rather quickly, once again, with McClellan. It makes me kind of wonder what might have happened if Pope was still in charge during the Antietam campaign, and might that have benefited the Union long term, or may it not have, just because McClellan still did a lot of meandering here. But let's actually use that, since we're kind of talking about McClellan, as a bit of a pivot to the state of the Army of Potomac in late August, early September of 1862. In context of this podcast, we would really be discussing a lot of the 1st New Jersey Brigade, which was what really took part at Crampton's. But as a whole, what was the state of the Army of the Potomac at this time? And I throw it to either of you.
In short, not good. Immediately after Second Manassas, they replaced Pope, like I think within a couple of days of the battle.
It was freakishly quick.
Very quick.
Yeah. And then they put McClellan, who was technically still in charge of the army, but notably did not have actual command authority to do anything. They put him back in charge of the Army of the Potomac. And whenever he gets in there, he does it, I'm gonna say, liberally a purge of the command hierarchy in that. Like, he completely wipes out some of his, like, core commanders in their entirety, because a lot of them were just inept, like Siegel, Nathaniel Banks. Both of them are just basically removed from control of both of their corps, because McClellan didn't like them. Burnside almost got removed, but Burnside was successful enough in the Carolinas campaign that he was able to keep his 9th Corps. But, like, after Second Manassas, which I also call it Manassas, just because it's a more fun thing to say in Bull Run. But First and Fifth Corps, they took probably the brunt of the fighting during Second Manassas. So they were held in reserve for the most part. If they were going to be engaged during any subsequent campaigning, they were going to be engaged with a bunch of extra support, because they really were low on their troop, like, manpower totals. Second Corps hadn't been touched since the Peninsula. Sixth Corps had barely been touched by the Peninsula. We talk about the 1st New Jersey Brigade. They had a very limited engagement just directly after Second Manassas, where they, as a single brigade, accidentally run upon Jackson's entire corps, conveniently, literally at the train station, like, at Manassas. They run into Jackson's entire corps and take like 400 casualties, but that is the only engagement I think the entirety of 6th Corps had during the entire, like, North Virginia campaign.
And it is true, they do a lot of fighting on the peninsula. I don't want to take this all back, just focus on the peninsula that much. Like, I don't want to take it back that far for too long, but I do want to say is that the 6th Corps does a lot of fighting on the peninsula. And of course, 1st New Jersey Brigade, being a part of that corps, does a lot of fighting on the peninsula. They fight in every one of the 7 days battles, and they get tore up. They get tore up pretty bad, especially at Malvern Hill and Gaines Mill. And then after that, they are given what is probably a much needed respite. So I'm glad that Fire brought that up specifically, because into the Maryland campaign, the 6th Army Corps is kind of coming into this campaign pretty fresh. They are veteran soldiers, but they haven't seen a whole lot of heavy fighting for some months.
Yeah, if we want to talk about veteran soldiers, the 1st Corps were pretty new. The 9th Corps, they had some fighting down in the Carolinas, but nothing to the extent that you would see in Northern Virginia, so they were pretty new. The 12th Corps were entirely new. They had barely seen anything. If you really wanted to go and look at, like, the corps that had experience and had, like, manpower, you're kind of stuck with 5th Corps and 6th Corps, and 5th Corps got beat up. So 6th Corps is really, like, they were recuperating outside of Washington during the Northern Virginia campaign. The only reason that the New Jersey Brigade moved out is because they need to go and, like, recon by force the rail lines, because they heard that the Jackson and the cavalry were trying to, like, sever rail lines over by Manassas. So they do that reconnaissance by force. That's the only thing that they do that entire campaign. They're otherwise just sitting at Washington.
Okay.
So they're veterans, but they're, like, fresh veterans.
They're well-rested veterans.
Yeah.
And then there is sort of the reorganization. It's not a massive reorganization, but it is a reorganization that happens, because a lot of what was the Army of Virginia gets mixed in and becomes the Army of the Potomac. I can't maybe one of you know. I can't remember which corps it is, but one of the corps in the Army of Virginia gets renumbered. It has a new number.
That's
in the Army of the
1st Corps
Potomac.
that used to be 3rd Corps.
Okay. 1st Corps Army of the Potomac used to be 3rd Corps Army of Virginia. So they also have the reality that now there's a lot more people in the Army. The Army of the Potomac has grown. I think it's the largest it ever was up to that point now. And they have a lot of new personalities, let's say.
Well, I think I know the numbers off the top of my head. The Army of the Potomac versus that of, I think the number was something like the Army of the Potomac had around 120,000 men, give or take, at the start of Lee's invasion of the North, somewhere around there. And then I think Lee had somewhere around 70,000.
It's 120,000, but like somewhere around 20,000 of those aren't like combat troops. They're mostly logistical things. So
Yes.
effectively, it's like 100,000 combatants versus like 50 to 60,000 combatants for the
Yeah.
Confederacy, because the Confederacy is much worse at logistics.
They were much worse. Well, that actually kind of might pivot into the next bit, which something that certainly changed the fate, or at least I've always interpreted it this way, changed the fate of Lee's invasion in 1862 was the accidental discovery by the Union of his Special Order 191, which contained everything that he wanted on it, that he wanted the Confederate armies to do. And
it was everything he wanted them to do, and also the time slots that they were supposed to do everything. It was such an intelligence coup that fell into enemy hands. It was so bad.
Well, it's very funny because it was discovered in a cigar box by a Corporal Barton W. Mitchell. He was from the 27th Indiana Volunteer Regiment. And when he brought it to his immediate superiors, at first they didn't believe him.
They thought it was the word, a ruse de guerre.
Yeah, yes. And but somebody who had the right mindset, I guess, said, well, we might as well pass this up anyways. And eventually it landed in front of McClellan, and McClellan was reported to have said, now I know what to do. Here is a paper which, if I cannot whip Bobby Lee, I will be willing to go home. So
Survey says no.
Survey said no. So what exactly was Special Order 191? And I think that one of the more important elements of Order 191 and Lee's overall strategy was just how much he split his army apart. And I think him having the smaller numbers really allowed him to do that, believe it or not. When you might want to think you want to keep your army pretty tight together if you have smaller numbers, but in reality it allows you to split it apart and move a lot quicker. I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on that or any more thoughts on 191.
Well, he's got to split his army. Like if you really think about it, he can't ignore the garrison of Harper's Ferry. So he already has to split his army into at least two parts. And then if you think about it, being as heavily outnumbered as he is, I'm not necessarily sure that keeping the army together at all times is necessarily the best thing. Because if you think about it, they're going to get into an engagement regardless, or at least that's the idea. I mean, he wants a battle. You know, he doesn't want to go into Maryland and not fight. I'm sure best case scenario, he would rather the North just accept Southern independence, but that's not going to happen. So he wants a fight in Maryland. He didn't go to Maryland for nothing. And the more he spreads out his army, the more ground he can cover. He can attach his cavalry to the different parts of his army. His cavalry can spread out along those parts, and the vedettes and the scouts can gather significantly more intelligence. I mean, the amount of ground that Lee covers with his relatively small force is massive compared to the Army of the Potomac, especially considering that it took the Army of the Potomac finding Special Orders 191 to actually do something about Lee crossing the Potomac. I find it, I always look back at it and I'm absolutely flabbergasted that somehow the Union cavalry, Alfred Pleasanton, fire knows I'm not a big fan of Alfred Pleasanton, somehow doesn't fully know that Lee has crossed the Potomac with 2/3 of his force. How you don't know that, and how that doesn't raise an alarm, and how that information does not immediately get back to the commanding general is completely and utterly beyond me.
It is a bit...
To give some context on Sauce's disdain for Pleasanton, Pleasanton is generally held to be the reason why McClellan is so cautious on the peninsula. Pleasanton constantly gave McClellan reports that the army in defense of Richmond was somewhere around like 4 to 5 times its actual size.
Yes. in
Like,
one
it
of the
was
most
saying that
brilliant
the army was 300,000 rebels strong, which is
in one of
insane to think
the
about.
in one of the most brilliant uses of deception I've ever seen in any campaign ever is how the Confederates were able to trick and make themselves look a lot bigger than they actually were, which slowed McClellan down to literally a crawl when he could have really just marched right over them with the amount of forces that he had down there. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I did want to mention this. Oh, no, go ahead, Fire.
Oh, I do want to tell a little funny story about how Special Order 191 got like found out, because it's
Absolutely.
incredibly like it's a very happenstance thing that they got it. The corporal found a cigar box. He was just like opening it up, and this man cannot read. This is a corporal who cannot read a goddamn thing. And he opens this up, sees some funny letters on it, gives it to his first sergeant, who goes up to his like commanding officer, who just so happens to have one of the aides de camp of 12th Corps, like sitting there, a guy named Samuel Pittman. And the reason why they think that it's a genuine order is because this Samuel Pittman guy used to be a bank teller at a bank in Detroit back pre-war. And he recognized Robert Chilton, who was the like adjutant general for Lee's entire army. He recognized his handwriting because Chilton used to be a paymaster for the army up in Michigan. So the only reason that we know anything about like Special Order 191, and it was actually like believed to be true, is because this one random like bank teller just so happened to recognize some handwriting. Is like, oh shit, that's his actual thing. That's genuine, and that's why it eventually would go up to McClellan. It's just such an odd series of events that like make that actually like noteworthy historically.
There's something that I really wanted to mention because I forgot to bring it up in the earlier part, but one of the reasons why Lee was so obsessed with Maryland for a little while was because he thought genuinely that Maryland would be a lot more sympathetic to the South than they would the North. And what he discovered very quickly, talking about plans never go, no plan ever survives for initial contact. What he discovered very quickly is that a lot of the civilian population within Maryland was not sympathetic to having the Confederates there and, taking their food and supplies and everything like that, which was just something that I found kind of interesting because the Confederates were so sure that the people of Maryland would be way more sympathetic because they weren't, quote unquote, the invading army. They were first, quote unquote, invaded by this army of the Potomac. But instead, the opposite happened within Maryland, and that's something I didn't want to leave out because it shows that Lee kind of misjudged some of the things, some of the reasonings of going up there to begin with. He thought it was going to be more of a cakewalk than what ended up being delivered to him.
Turns out most of the pro-Confederate Marylanders went down south like Trimble did.
Yep. And in a way, it's almost similar to the Kentucky situation, right? A lot of Kentuckians that would have otherwise been either neutral or potentially slightly pro-Confederate, once the Confederates cross into Kentucky, they all of a sudden they're not so convinced of, this whole, Southern Confederacy thing anymore because they feel as though their wishes have been sort of thrown in the trash. I mean, if you look at it from the perspective of a Marylander at that time, the war really hadn't been in Maryland very much, right? There are minor engagements, there's scouting and probing that goes on in Maryland, fairly close to the Potomac, but nothing's really happened, at least not in the eastern part of the state where most people lived. And so for Lee to cross into Maryland, he is kind of bringing the war to them, and they don't. I mean, who wants a war on their doorstep? And in fact, at the Battle of South Mountain, the war will be on several people's literal doorstep, or rather in their backyards.
Yeah.
I don't, from that point forward, I don't know how you could actually expect a large number of Marylanders, at least in that area, to somehow rise up to your cause.
And then just to kind of wrap up what's going on in Lee heading north, I do find it a little baffling, and we were kind of talking about the lack of progress really made by the Army of the Potomac, but I didn't realize it was this almost pathetic, and it's almost so weird. It's almost funny. It's almost comical how this plays out. Lee had discovered by September 13th that McClellan knew what his plan was. And the reason why he was able to discover was because General Stuart's cavalry managed to find a copy of the New York Herald. And in the New York Herald, it stated on the front page, General Lee's plan found.
See, this is why you don't put like
awful
reporters.
OPSEC.
This is why you don't put reporters in with your army headquarters. This is why, McClellan.
Total OPSEC failure.
Yes, yes. And I was like, Jesus, oh my God. And so as a result, Lee actually worked pretty quickly, if I remember correctly, because a lot of what happens within, or what leads up to Crampton's Gap and all of those battles of the gaps all in around there, was Lee was now trying to reconsolidate his army because he got that tip that he could be essentially cut to pieces the way how he was at that time. So he rapidly wanted to redeploy his men to kind of consolidate them in and around Sharpsburg, if that's correct. I believe that's correct.
Later
Yes,
around Sharpsburg, kind of around Boonesboro, and then later Harper's Ferry, between there and Rowersville.
I want to ask a question real quick. What, I don't know it off the top of my head. What day? Is it on the 13th? The 12th? I don't know which day Special Order 191 was found.
I want to
Give me 1 second. I will find it right here. It was on September 13th.
Okay.
Fantastic. So just a little bit of context, just so that we're all fully understanding the Union cavalry under the command of Alfred Pleasanton, and how much I hate. Well, it's honestly, it's hard to say that you hate a man who's dead, but how much this man and the Union cavalry in the Maryland campaign and before absolutely frustrates me. In Pleasanton's official report, it states that on the 7th, 2 squadrons of the 8th Illinois and 2 of the 3rd Indiana Cavalry under Major Chapman of the 3rd made a dash at Poolesville, captured 2 cavalry vedettes, and all of the enemy in the town at the time, implying that there were many more than just 2 Confederates in the town of Poolesville, which is about 1.5 miles from the Potomac. And then it goes on later in that paragraph to talk about how they had placed some artillery. So the Confederates were confident enough in their position there, 1.5 miles across the Potomac, that they had parked batteries. And yet it takes finding Special Orders 191 for any rapid movement of the army to commence.
Well, even then, it's not that rapid. They move at a. The Army of the Potomac moves at a very sluggish
rapid
pace.
Relative to McClellan standard.
Okay, you know what? Yeah,
funny.
all right.
It's kind of funny. Lee, he kind of knew something weird was going on. That's probably why it was more important whenever Stuart showed the newspaper to him. Because he was looking back on the east side of South Mountain, because I think his headquarters was like in Boonesboro or something, or he was at least checking out Boonesboro. And he was looking out east and he's like, why is McClellan coming up so fast? What changed? That don't sound like him.
He specifically mentions the speed, or relative speed, if we can say, with which the Army of the Potomac moves as unusual. I
wouldn't say necessarily speed, but the aggressiveness of which they were pushing.
I would agree with that, yeah. Not necessarily speed, but aggressiveness. Confidence, perhaps, with which they were moving in certain directions.
Did they switch commanders and just not mention it? Because that don't feel like McClellan in the slightest. And he's kind of right. This is a very different McClellan.
Well, a lot of this happens in and around September 13th, what we're discussing today. A lot of this, it kind of happens in rapid succession. So what exactly happened on September 13th in in relation to the Battle of Crampton's Gap very specifically is General McClaw was to take Maryland Heights, and he was bombarding the Union garrison there. What he did is he sent Brigadier General William Mahone, he had 3 regiments, Brigadier General Howell Cobb, who had 1 brigade, and then Colonel Thomas T. Munford, who was the cavalry detachment. They essentially were sent to guard McClaw's rear because they knew that there was some movement going on down there. And they also realized that if their rear could be cut, if McClaw's could be cut off in that direction, essentially the worst case scenario would happen for General Lee, which was his army would be cut to pieces one by one because it was split apart so much. And so General Lee actually reportedly sent a dispatch to General Cobb, and this was Cobb talking about the order which he got from General Lee. He said, quote, hold the gap if it costs the life of every man in my command. So it was important that he basically do a holding action, is essentially what I kind of gathered the Confederates were kind of doing, while Lee could maneuver the rest of his army and more consolidate it while this was happening. I don't know if you guys have anything to add to that.
Well, I do want to add it's important to mention about Cobb. I'm glad you brought up that quote, and that is a true quote. It does say that in Cobb's battle report. It is important to mention that the events that take place in that report are of the 14th. In the battle report, it does say that he gets that dispatch on the 14th. So not on the 13th when we're talking about Lee is now dispatching troops to hold the gaps in a delaying action. Everything there with Cobb actually happens after that. I think on the 13th, he was actually at Sandy Hook, I believe, if I have that right.
He was holding like much farther down towards the Potomac.
Yes,
closer
he
towards
was.
The Weverton Pass.
He was at Sandy Hook, Virginia, on the Potomac, on the 13th. He moves. I can't remember where he moves. On the morning of the 14th. Well, I guess we'll get into more of this when we get into actual battle. But I'll just wrap it up with this real quick. He moves somewhere. They order him to move back to Sandy Hook. And then before he gets to Sandy Hook, he is then given orders to move to Crampton's Gap.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very back and forth sort of thing because they really did not know which one of those passes they were going to go after.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, is because there's multiple of these gaps and passes that the Confederates kind of, to me, it felt like they sort of just rapidly deployed there just to kind of guard them, because to me it sounds like they didn't know which one the Union was going to go for.
Yeah, there's 3 of them. There's Crampton's Gap, which is honestly the biggest one, the one that's more likely to be of military importance. It's the one that it's best used as a means to get like heavy equipment over.
Mm-hmm.
There's Brownsville Pass, which is technically closer, probably easier to defend, also an absolutely terrible thing to bring thousands of people through. And then there's the Weverton Pass, which is basically where the Potomac just cuts straight through the South Mountains at the around Knoxville and Sandy Hook. And it is right next to Harper's Ferry. Like, you can see it from Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
But it is also way too close to McClaw's. So they figured that it would probably be somewhere close to Burkittsville between the Brownsville or the Crampton's Gap. So that's why they keep moving back and forth between Weverton and later Crampton's Gap.
But either way, it's not a very, and we'll get more into the numbers a little bit later, but the Confederates stationed at Crampton's Gap is not a very sizable force. Yeah. It's a very small force.
They'd always had troops there, like, ever since they started moving around in that part, but it was like a regiment total, period. Like, Munford's cavalry column, I believe. Part of them were, like, I think a literal company or squadron, whatever they called it, were at Brownsville Gap with 120 from, like, a company or two of another regiment. That was all the defense they had at the beginning of, like, the 13th into the 14th. Yeah. So they just slowly moved more people in from McClaw's reserves whenever it became fairly obvious that Miles was kind of doomed down there in Harper's Ferry. And also that Franklin was coming in from the east.
Which, mentioning Franklin, brings us into the next sort of topic that we wish to discuss is who the hell did the Army of the Potomac send towards Crampton's Gap? And that was Major General William Franklin's Sixth Corps, and his orders were to attack McLaw's rear. The thing that seems to kind of baffle me, at least on paper, is that there is an 11-hour delay between Franklin getting the orders, but McClellan didn't do anything to push him along. It was supposedly it was to allow the Sixth Corps to quote unquote rest, but there is an 11-hour delay from when Franklin received his orders to when he actually started moving. Do you guys have, and for the record, I believe the reasoning is lost to history. It's just a lot of conjuncture. But do you guys, what might have caused that 11-hour delay? Why was there such a wait? That is and that's the most baffling part for me in terms of what the Union were doing, is just the amount of time they wasted.
My guess, and I was doing some research this morning, and I came across this little snippet, for future reference. Read D. Scott Hartwig's, Antietam, his 2-volume Antietam set. Great series of books. Also very expensive. But reading through that, I was reading how, on the morning of the 14th, and overnight on the 13th, McClellan and Franklin got a report that there was a, and I quote, sizable rebel force at Petersville, which is around modern day Brunswick, just basically between Jefferson and the Potomac River. And I think they might have been trying to figure out if that was actually a real obstacle that they had to deal with, because if that's down there, if Franklin tries to push Crampton's Gap, he's kind of screwed. They're just going to hit him in the butt. So that's my guess. I don't imagine that they needed too much rest, because again, the Sixth Corps was relatively fresh. If you wanted to give anybody a rest, give all of the people up by Frederick that are soon going to go into the rest of the South Mountain, around Boonesboro. But that's my guess. They definitely were trying to get Darius Crouch's division was also attached to Sixth Corps. They called it a wing. It really wasn't. But he was 6 miles away from the rest of Sixth Corps, down closer towards the Potomac, and he was far enough away that they wanted to give him some time to get up, but he didn't move at all overnight, and he never got over to Crampton's Gap until literally 10:30 at night. So that's the best guess I have. I don't know.
Well, I don't know, because McClellan, he doesn't actually issue orders officially first to Franklin until 6:20 p.m. And I did look
that's
this
late.
up. It is late.
Yeah.
On the 13th specifically. And I did look this up actually, and it is very likely that on the 13th that would have already been after dark.
Because this is April. Sorry.
This is September.
September. That's what I meant.
In southern Maryland, and I actually did look this up online. I tried to find the most accurate source I could, but essentially the estimate is the sun would have set around that time, somewhere between 6:15 and 6:30. So there's about a 15-minute window where we could say, has the sun set yet? Yada yada yada. But 6:20, it's very possible that that was either already after the sunset or as the sun was setting. And that is actually the first official order that Franklin gets. I'm not necessarily sure where McClellan's headquarters is relevant to Urbana, which would have been the vicinity which the Sixth Corps would have been in at that time. I know specifically the 1st Division is in camp slightly to the west of Urbana, specifically 3 miles to the southeast of, I forget the name of the town now, 3 miles southeast of, I'm gonna have to type it in Google Maps, aren't I?
Yeah, go
Urbana.
ahead.
What is around Urbana?
All I know of where the Sixth Corps was is they're somewhere east of the, Catoctin Mountains? I don't remember how to pronounce it. But most of them are somewhere to the east of those mountains, and then Couch is somewhere around Buckystown. That's all I know about where they are. I know
Yep.
they cross around Jefferson.
Yes, yeah, they cross. They are about 3 miles southeast of Jefferson, slightly to the northwest of Urbana. I'm not sure where McClellan's headquarters at that specific point in time is in reference to that location.
I imagine he's probably somewhere up close towards Frederick, if I had to guess.
That is the largest town in the area. Certainly, the accommodations to have an army headquarters would be found there. Even then, if it is already nightfall or after nightfall, I'm certain it would have taken longer to find the staff of the 6th Corps at night. Sure, it would have taken significantly longer. I would reckon to say that if the orders do reach Franklin on the 13th at all, it's probably not until just before midnight.
Oh, Franklin gets them. Franklin is at McClellan's headquarters whenever he gets the order.
Oh, fantastic!
Like,
well, that everything I just
all
said
on
is
top of each other at that point.
completely a moot point. He knows about it.
He knows about it. He just doesn't have the time.
Shame on
get
you,
the troops
Franklin.
He just doesn't have the time to get the troops to go over the mountain pass without probably drastically messing up his lines.
Well, you know, we are kind of talking about Franklin right now. Who was really involved with Sixth Corps? Because Franklin is a general that a lot of people don't know very much about, including me. But Sixth Corps has a lot of interesting guys in it under his flag. So what exactly did Sixth Corps really consist of? Who was really under his command?
Well, the important thing to know about the 6th Corps is that it is at this point, I believe, the largest corps in the Union Army, give or take a few thousand. But it only has 2 divisions.
Like 10,800 fighting men at that point. That's like a tenth
It's over
of the army.
12,000. Yeah, it's over 12,000. But yeah, fighting men specifically, probably infantry is around the 10,000 range.
And that's not even including the 5,000 extra from Couch's division that's attached to 6th Corps.
And the cavalry that's attached to him, which I believe there are 3 regiments of cavalry, I want to say, attached to him.
And one important thing about all of the regiments that are attached to 6th Corps, only one of them is a new regiment. Everybody else is a veteran of some combat sometime in the last year.
Yep.
So only one of them is a brand spanking new regiment. So this is a veteran corps led by a veteran commander.
Yep. William Franklin commanding the 6th Corps. He's got a little bit of cavalry and infantry specifically for his headquarters escort and his headquarters guard. That's going to be companies BG&I of the 6th Pennsylvania Cavalry under Captain Henry Muirhead. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's got an R and something Hyde. It starts with an M. Then he's got Company D, the 95th Pennsylvania Infantry, specifically his headquarters guard, and it's under the command of Captain Jacob Bates. But the rest of his troops are combat troops. He's got 2 divisions in his corps. One of them is commanded by Major General Henry Slocum, who I think a lot of people who might know a little something about the Battle of Gettysburg will know that name, Slocum. He goes on to command the 12th Corps, and then I believe at the Battle of Gettysburg, he's effectively in command of the right wing.
Yes.
And then the 2nd Division is under the command of Major General William Smith. Each of those divisions, have 3 brigades in them. And then they each have their own division artillery. I guess you could call it an artillery brigade, maybe an artillery battalion. There's not really a name for it, but they each have their own artillery, 4 batteries for the 1st Division, 3 batteries for the 2nd Division.
Okay.
All total, there's somewhere around like 17,000 men, horses, artillery. And fun thing about all of the division commanders, Couch, Slocum, and Smith, all of them eventually become corps commanders in their own right. Slocum eventually takes, what was it, 11th Corps, 12th
The
Corps?
12th Corps.
Smith takes 6th Corps in Fredericksburg. Couch takes, oh god, which one does Couch take? He takes one of the corps sometime
I
later on in the
believe it
war.
is either the 4th or the 2nd.
Yeah, one of the two.
One of those is correct, and one of those is wrong.
But like all of them are very experienced. They're like all professional officers at this point. I think the reason why McClellan had 6th Corps all by its lonesome down to the south is because he trusted Franklin more than probably anybody that's not Sumner. And Sumner is off there with McClellan dealing with a 2nd Corps.
Which is notably only one division, effectively.
Yeah. Okay. So,
oh, my bad.
Oh no, go ahead. Say who was commanding.
Oh, I was just gonna say under Darius Couch, Major General Darius Couch, commanding, I think it's 1st Division.
That's for 4th Corps.
Oh, that is correct. That's for 4th Corps. Okay, so I'm getting my 4th and my 2nd Corps messed up then.
Sumner was the one with Richardson and Sedgwick and all of them, French.
That's right. That's right.
Let's move on before we get too much into the weeds here, because I don't want to get so bogged down with too much information. That's kind of key when it comes to this. But so it's now September 14th, right? And so the Confederates, or these men under McClaw, again, that's William Mahone, Cobb, and Thomas T. Munford, they're moving in toward Crampton's Gap. Meanwhile, 6th Corps arrives near Crampton's Gap. And by the time that 6th Corps arrives at where this battle will eventually take place, there is yet another delay. There is a notable 3-hour delay, and I think this delay is more important than the 11-hour one, because this delay is what, while this battle is a technical victory for the Union, what makes it kind of a more prolonged victory for the Confederacy. Because of this 3-hour delay, it bought the Confederates precious time to redeploy elsewhere. But it is really unknown why, as to Franklin kind of hesitated to begin his attack on Crampton's Gap. And I mentioned in my notes here, maybe they were being bombarded by enemy artillery, because apparently there was a decent Confederate artillery position that was shooting down at them when this was all happening. But when I started looking more at the terrain itself, and while I didn't personally visit Crampton's Gap, I'm hoping I can visit there this year, I watched a video on YouTube of a guy walking through the battlefield itself, and suddenly I realized this terrain sucks. This terrain is some of the most confused. There's lots of woods. There's a lot of rolling hills. And to me, the 3 hours, I suddenly start understanding it more. Because the Union, it seems like they were trying to figure out, all right, how the hell are we going to deploy on here? Because the Confederates have positioned themselves behind these stone walls, as per usual. They have a wonderful defensive position here, where they're kind of up on a hill. They're looking down into nothing but open fields. And the Union are going to have no choice but to go through those open fields if they're going to want to secure Crampton's Gap. And my guess is that that 3-hour delay was because the officers were genuinely trying to figure out how the hell can we best deploy in this really shitty area.
And I think you're exactly right, because every single report from the Union officers, and we're mainly talking about regimental level up to the Corps, every single report from these officers specifically talks about the manner in which the assault column was to be arrayed. It was a big deal. And they all say the same thing. It's sort of weird. It almost reads like a broken record, because I know of at least 4 or 5 different individual reports, whether that be from regimental commanders, brigade commanders, or the division commanders, in the Sixth Corps, where they all mention essentially the same thing. It was immediately clear to everyone that the position could only be carried by massed assault of the infantry over open ground, and so little attention was paid to the disposition of the artillery. So they're taking a very long time. And they're doing this very meticulously to set up their assault column. And they're also trying desperately to look for any cover, any way that they can bring their troops into battle line without them being seen and shot at by the Confederate guns. Because there are 8 Confederate guns in position, and they're in fairly strong positions. Now, some of the Confederate gunners may have may have been a little perturbed at the position their guns were in. It made it extremely difficult for them to load, fire, and preserve their pieces. I think, Fire, you and I were talking about this the other day. I think one of them actually breaks.
Oh yeah.
Specifically because of the position it's in. And they are essentially in defilade. And so even though 2 Union batteries respond, so that's 12 guns of the Sixth Corps respond to the fire of the 8 guns of the Confederacy, which I can't remember the names of the batteries. Fire, you might know. There's 6 guns on the left side of the road at the bend of what is today it's the modern Gaplin Road. There's 4 guns there from 6 guns there from one battery and then 2 from another. And then there are 2 specifically posted on the Gaplin Road. I can't remember the names of the battery commanders, however. But even though the Union is responding to the fire from these guns, they're having very little effect because notably the Confederate guns are in defilade. For those that don't know, I mean, probably a lot of folks that are going to watch this video have played War of Rights before, or might be in War of Rights regiments. And a very common tactic in that game among artillerists is to put your gun in defilade. So you only want the barrel of your gun essentially to be sticking out above a hill, and you want most of the gun, including the carriage, the limber, and the men who are operating it, to have some cover. And that is exactly what the Confederates did at Crampton's Gap, and it made it extremely hard for the Union gunners to respond.
I think one of Walcott's battery's guns gets knocked out because they could not get into defilade, and the Confederates were just chewing them up outside.
And
Well,
even the way the assault column is arrayed screams a fear of artillery.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, the way they form this assault column is they have the brigades one behind the other, and then they have each brigade in 2 lines. And most of the brigades in the Corps have 4 regiments. And what they do is they put 2 regiments in the front, and they put 2 regiments in the rear, and they have all of the regiments in line. So they're trying to mass for the assault, but at the same time they are also trying to sort of equalize that by providing the Confederate artillery with the least juicy target that they possibly can.
Well, the attack doesn't begin until 3 p.m., right? So it doesn't fully begin until 3 p.m. And it looks like once Sixth Corps actually finally does do their big push, quote unquote, because it was described, as you said, kind of slow and meticulous at first. But once they really get up there, the Confederates really didn't have much of a chance, and they were indeed pushed back for quite a bit, and they had broken apart pretty bad too, because they were heavily outnumbered by Sixth Corps, like tremendously outnumbered by
probably the understatement of the century.
Yes,
I believe it was 2,700 defenders, and like Slocum's division by itself was like what, 5,000 men.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
2 to 1.
Yeah, so they outnumbered. Yeah. It was a ridiculous. It was a ridiculous number, and I also read somewhere in a book about that kind of mentions this, is that they also weren't quite sure how big of force the Confederates had that they were facing as well. So that might also kind of play into a little bit of the caution as to moving out there. But
there's three real big delays that happen. One's actually during the battle, and one you guys mentioned, and there's one before. Early in the morning,
Jefferson, right?
Yes. So early in the morning at 5:30, they start moving. It takes them 3 hours to get off of the Catoctin Mountains, and they just kind of sit there and eat breakfast on the other side while they're hoping that Couch can regroup. The reason that they had Couch attached is because McLaws had 2 full divisions, and they just wanted to make sure that they outnumbered McLaws so that they had 3 divisions just in case. So that's why they were kind of waiting on him. Around like 8 o'clock, they just kind of gave up on waiting on him. They kept going. Around 11 o'clock is when they finally start seeing Crampton's Gap. By 11:30, they're getting shot at, so they stop for lunch, and they start kind of trying to work out a plan. That takes like an hour.
That's when the 96th Pennsylvania is deployed as skirmishers east of the town.
Yeah, and they're just kind of like shooting at what they describe, and I quote, as 2 guns and 4 cavalrymen.
Nice.
One of their, I think it was a corporal, goes and talks to one of the residents of Burkittsville, the town right at the bottom of Crampton's Gap, and he says that there are 4,000 Confederates, 8 guns, and they are raring for a fight. So they kind of have to like, okay, do we believe the cavalrymen? We all know Sauce's opinion on that. Or do you believe the random dude who's been living here and can literally see them coming back and forth up and down the mountain all day? They choose to believe him, and they get real cautious about like, okay, if that's 8 guns, that's going to be a problem. So they formulate this plan, and it doesn't take a super long time to formulate the plan. What it does take a while for, and Sauce mentioned this earlier, is how are they going to get their division, because they're sending Slocum's division first, into a position where they could actually start fighting. And what they come to is they're off a place, at that time it was called Middletown Road, now it's called Catholic Church Road, and they're going along what's called Burkitt's Run and then later Manor Run. And they're just like, they're keeping their brigades, which 2 regiments in a line, that's like 200 yards wide. Plus.
It's not a short distance.
It's a very wide formation, and then they have 2 regiments deep, and then they're doing that every 200 yards there will be a new brigade. So it is probably a solid half a mile long formation if they keep the distance that they're told to, and they have to move through this little creek bed, and I mean creek bed. If you look at it on a map now, it is quite literally like you can step your foot in, and that's probably as deep as the water ever gets. And they're trying to use the ravine, as they call it, in all of their papers. They're trying to use that to screen their force, which actually surprisingly works. They start moving at around 2:30. The rebels don't actually see them until they're about 1,000 yards away at around 3:30 in the afternoon. So
they're helped out a lot, I think, by the rolling of
the rolling
fields.
Hills, the trees.
Well,
Yeah,
that's something about the
east.
terrain. And again, this is the benefit of me being there or being in and around that area. The amount of rolling hills that is there is almost maddening. The amount of places where you could hide people very easily.
We were looking at Google Maps last night, and we were just like, how did they not see this coming? And we were like, oh no, that makes
That's
total sense.
exactly
You can't
why,
see
Yeah, Sauce, you and I were kind of joking about it when I was setting this up. I said I think I understand why there was such confusion there for a while, just because of how shitty the terrain of the terrain is, which to me sounds like almost every battle, especially out west, of the American Civil War. But so now this attack here, and kind of one after, is that the overall attack manages to push the Confederates back, but Cobb managed to rally the retreating Confederates to put up another fight, and it is around here where I need to mention the 1st New Jersey Brigade, and this is where it kind of directly impacts us because we're a part of the 4th New Jersey in the game War of Rights. And I don't know if you guys just want to kind of talk about the 1st New Jersey Brigade, which the 4th New Jersey was a regiment in. What kind of makeup were they? For example, I know, at least in the 4th New Jersey, I'm not sure about any of the other ones, but I'm pretty sure the 4th New Jersey was mainly armed with 1842 Springfields, if I remember correctly. So they didn't have, Enfields or 1861 Springfields or even the 55s. They had outdated weapons and stuff like that. I don't know if you guys could get into some of the nitty gritty about the makeup of the 1st New Jersey Brigade.
Well, the First New Jersey Brigade, which in the order battle designated First Brigade, First Division, Sixth Corps, at the Battle of Crampton's Gap is under the command of Colonel Alfred T.A. Torbert. Now, Alfred T.A. Torbert is the former commander of the 1st New Jersey Infantry. He has been detailed as the brigade commander, or the brigadier, as some like to call it. And so the 1st New Jersey Brigade is under the command of, at that time, Lieutenant Colonel Mark Cullett. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th New Jersey Infantry are the remaining 3 regiments that make up the 1st New Jersey Brigade. It's very convenient that the 1st New Jersey Brigade consists of the first 4 regiments of New Jersey Volunteers. And they are commanded by Samuel Buck, Henry Brown, and William Hatch, all colonels for the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Regiment, respectively. And the 4th Regiment, New Jersey Volunteers, is in its armament, as you mentioned, is extremely unique in this case, actually, with the rest of the brigade. And in order to understand why, we kind of have to go all the way back to the Peninsula Campaign at Gaines Mill, when the 1st New Jersey Brigade is essentially situated as a general reserve for a portion of the Union line. And specifically, the 4th New Jersey is actually placed on the 2nd line behind what is actually the 32nd Pennsylvania Volunteers, I think they are. At that point, they're the 3rd Pennsylvania Reserves. Notably, not even a part of the same division, first off. So that's how broken up the 1st New Jersey Brigade is at Gaines Mill. And when the Confederates attack at Gaines Mill, there's some controversy on who we should believe and who we shouldn't believe. But the basis of the story is that the 4th New Jersey stays in its position, it fights, it doesn't retreat, uses all of its ammunition, supposedly fights until every last round is used up. And then, seeing as they're already cut off, they then surrender because they really don't have any option. And about 500 men of the regiment, with only a few exceptions,
I think it was less
are
than
taken
20,
prisoner.
and like everybody else was taken over by one of Hood's Texan regiments, if I remember correctly.
I believe it is the 1st Texas.
Okay.
I think it is the first. If it's not the 1st, then it's the 4th Texas.
All I remember about whenever they got captured is whoever the commanding officer was for that Texas regiment was armed with a frying pan. Apparently, he lost his sword. That's all I can remember about that.
That's beautiful. That is so beautiful.
It's such a Texan thing.
Yeah.
That's like the hatchet guy at Gettysburg. I can't remember his name.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yeah.
Anyway, not to get too much on different things. The 4th New Jersey and the rest of the 1st New Jersey Brigade had been armed with 1855, 1851 Springfields. It's a little misleading sometimes when you say, or when you might read that, one regiment had 55s, or maybe a regiment had 61s, or what have you. Because actually in the ordnance records, they're actually considered the same thing. And when they're issued to soldiers, it actually says issued X number 55/61 Springfield. So it doesn't actually distinguish between the two very much. But they are armed with rifle muskets, but they lose them. Of course, the Confederates are pretty hard pressed for rifles, especially early in the war. And they take them. They're not just about to let the New Jersey boys walk away with their rifles after they get paroled. And so when they finally re-enter federal service, they do so and are issued. I'm not 100% sure whether it's all 42s. I wouldn't be surprised if there were perhaps some older percussion conversions in there as well. But all we know for 100% for sure, based on testimony from William Hatch, is that they were, quote, armed with imperfect smoothbores. So the 4th
And
New Jersey
boy,
Brigade
were
is
they mad
unique.
about it.
They were horrifically mad, foaming at the mouth mad about it, that the Army didn't have any rifles to give them, supposedly didn't have any rifles to give them. And so their armament is unique among the brigade. And that's a lot of the reasons why at the battle, the 4th New Jersey actually originates in the second line. They're actually not in the front originally. They are posted in the second line of the brigade along with the 3rd New Jersey. The 3rd New Jersey posted in the second line simply because it had been tore up pretty bad, specifically at that engagement that Fire mentioned earlier at Manassas Station. And they kind of sort of didn't want to just put them on the front and expose them because the frontage of the regiment wasn't even that large in general. So yeah, the 4th is in the back with the 3rd New Jersey specifically because of the arms that they have at their sides.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's interesting. So let's actually talk about the battle itself, the Battle of Crampton's Gap itself. And I pose this question to both of you, and it's really your time to kind of shine here. But how did this battle play out? Because there's that initial attack which breaks the Confederates, and then they rally, or General Cobb kind of rallies them to put up another fight, and then that's when the 1st New Jersey Brigade hits them again and causes them to withdraw there as well. And it leaves it essentially a Union victory. How did they get there?
Well, I guess maybe we should give it in the full context. I guess let's start at 3 p.m. I don't know, Fire, if you want to start with Colonel Bartlett.
Okay, so the 1st Division is arrayed in the order of 2nd, 3rd, then 1st Brigade. So Joseph Bartlett is commanding his brigade of a couple New Yorkers, the 96th Pennsylvania and the 5th Maine. Behind them is 3rd Brigade, commanded by John Newton, with 3 New York regiments and 1 Pennsylvanian, and then there's the New Jersey Brigade at the end of the line. They're the ones that have been most recently engaged. They're kind of supposed to be a reserve, but not really. So they start marching off along that little creek run that I was talking about. Bartlett first at around 2:30. It takes them a full hour to go what is effectively 1,000 yards. It takes them so long to go this very short distance because they are doing it in absolute peak perfect drill. Like, it is beautiful, apparently, to watch, according to some of their reports.
That is in Slocum's report. Actually, he says it was done with the precision as you might see in on drill or dress parade.
Yeah, but Bartlett's going. He's supposed to have John Newton behind him about 250 yards behind his rear line.
Survey says nope.
He looks behind him whenever he reaches the open fields that eventually becomes where a bunch of the fighting actually happens. He looks behind him, and his buddy John Newton is now 1,000 yards behind him. It takes him a full extra hour.
They essentially didn't move at all.
Yeah, it takes him a full extra hour to get up next to Bartlett, who in this entire time is about 400 yards away from the rebels. They are just shooting literally every shot they have. By the time that Newton finally comes online, Bartlett is effectively out of ammunition. They've taken some pretty hefty casualties because their wall is drastically inferior to the wall that the Confederates have along what is now Mountain Church Road.
Yes.
And there is artillery still slamming every time that one of these blue lines pops up into the field.
I don't want to underplay that. I don't want to underplay that. The stone walls, which if you go to Crampton's Gap today, you can see a recreation of some of these stone walls. It's not the original stone wall, but it's where they would have been. In particular, the Confederate positions. And the wall the Confederates were hiding behind was like perfect at giving them cover.
Yeah.
I can't understate that enough.
There were some parts that were like chest high. There was other parts that were apparently just high enough that you could hide behind it if you were crouching or like prone.
If you're a lot of people were
better than the Union had.
A lot of people were crouching.
Yeah.
From what I observed, and it is very I can't understate it. The Confederates had a much better place to put up a fight than the Union ever did, or
Yeah.
could have.
Cue Gettysburg quote. They don't even need guns to defend that hill. They can just throw rocks down at us.
Pretty much.
And they have artillery, and the Union basically don't. The Union artillery is quite literally not even bothered with it. So you have this point where Bartlett is just sitting there defending himself, trying with his whole brigade to go and make sure that the Rebs don't wipe them to a man, as Newton is trying to catch up.
And he
Torbert
must
is
have been
much-
pissed.
Yeah,
He
was
must have
not
been
happy.
pissed because it is notable that the only person who actually mentions this 1,000-yard gap is Bartlett.
Yeah.
He is the only person who mentions this 1,000-yard gap between himself and Newton in his report, and it is intentionally left out of Slocum's report. I would imagine Bartlett was pretty hot and heavy about the fact that his men essentially had to fight for 30 to 40 minutes unsupported.
Yeah. And then as Bartlett is starting to run out of ammunition, about 5 p.m. So again, this is 2 hours after they started their advance. By that point, finally Newton shows up, and Torbert is right behind him. I guess Torbert was raring to go with the New Jersey Brigade. So they're aligned from right to left with Bartlett, and then Newton, and then Torbert.
Well, what's interesting as well is when they get into the position, Newton actually kind of splits his command as well, because he actually sends 3 regiments, not 3, my bad, 2 regiments to Bartlett's right actually, to extend the right flank, and then the other 2 regiments on the left flank. So they have this really weird situation where you have Newton, Bartlett, Newton, and then Torbert.
Yeah. Anyways, they get to this wall, and they kind of sit there for what seems to be an hour from Franklin's perspective. Really, it was about 20 to 30 minutes. But Franklin's just sitting there in the rear, a solid 1.5 miles, 2 miles away from where the fighting is, panicking because, why is this advance just completely halted? Oh, we're not going to take this pass by nightfall. He starts sending McClellan messages, saying all of this, basically kind of whining in a way, while also sending forth a Vermont brigade under Brooks from Smith's division to go and try and support the left side of the line for Slocum's division on the other side of Burkittsville. So he's trying to go and push more troops forward because the line has completely stalled. Slocum, notably, is doing nothing right now. In the meantime, Bartlett, who's already kind of pissed and probably trying to just find some way to get out of this terrible position he's in. Newton, who's, trying to deal with the fact that he took forever and then array his troops. And Torbert, who's off on the left flank, just kind of hiding from the bullets. All assemble together around Newton's command and go and make up this plan completely without anything from the brigade or from the division, from the corps commanders at all. They just make up this decision. Okay, we're just going to charge straight at him. Fuck it. And they decide to start with Torbert on the left, send the rear line forward first, and then Newton, and then Bartlett. And they're just going to do this mass charge. Nobody's going to take a shot. We're already low enough on ammo. We're just going to charge straight at him. So, it starts off whenever Torbert
It was definitely a Hail Mary.
Yeah, it was
sort of thing.
It was such a Hail Mary moment. It's very reminiscent of Chamberlain's thing on Little Round Top, except these guys are the attackers, not the defenders.
I was going to say, except these guys are attacking uphill.
Yeah.
And it's notable that none of this comes from Slocum. And I can't even begin to imagine what Slocum was doing at this moment. And I've kind of this is total theorizing on my part, but I have almost kind of sort of came up with this excuse for Newton being so far back in my own brain, because potentially Slocum wasn't doing his job. And potentially Newton was having to coordinate between his brigade and Torbert's brigade. It's probably not true, but I feel like I'd like to give Newton that kind of benefit of the doubt, especially because in Torbert's report, he specifically mentions that he got the order to charge from Newton.
Yeah,
And
Newton
not
really came up
Slocum.
with that idea. But anyways, so it starts off with the 3rd and 4th New Jersey. Torbert gives them the signal. William Hatch, the commander of the 4th New Jersey, says, "Forward, 4th Battalion, charge bayonets." And they jump up and, I
Which is
quote,
metal.
"scream like devils," and they full sprint straight at Munford's brigade.
Hell yeah.
A
Just
full
yeah.
sprint from the
Full
start,
sprint.
over
And this-
extent of 300 yards.
You know, everybody
400.
talks about the rebel yell being terrifying. Don't ever underestimate the Union Army screaming at you at the top of their lungs. Don't ever underestimate that.
Which is really funny, because whenever the Confederates see this, the 12th Virginia saw them, and one of them said, "Look yonder, boys, they're coming across the field." And then they get a command of fix bayonets, and then within a couple of seconds, because it takes them a full 2 minutes at a sprint to cover this 400-yard gap.
Jesus
Fall
Christ.
The Confederate commanders are just screaming, fall back, and they break
They
and head
nope out
towards
of
the rear.
there very quickly.
Um,
They notably do not make a stand at that stone wall.
Yeah.
They do not. When
Depending-
they see the essentially the mass of Slocum's division coming across that field at them with bayonets leveled, they hightail it out of there pretty quickly.
Well, I was going to say, they're outnumbered significantly. Like, they didn't really have a chance. If everyone is charging at
certainly
once
would've
like
stayed
that.
there.
What?
Yeah.
I certainly would have stood there. I would not have stood there myself. I think they made the perfect decision.
Oh, I was going to say, it makes logical... it makes sense why they would get... the Confederates would hightail it out of there at that charge.
Oh, I forgot. One of the reasons why they initiated this charge when they did is because they heard rebels screaming from the top of the gap, and they were pretty sure that was them getting reinforcements, which they turns out to be right. Cobb is actively coming down the gap now and is preparing to form his brigade directly behind them.
Yes.
So you have
And-
this New Jersey swarm straight into the Confederate right. Depending on which regiment we're talking about, one of them breaks whenever the Union are 150 yards away. Another one breaks when they're about 20 yards away and just completely shatters their right flank.
That puts it politely. They were dropping their weapons. They were running as fast as they could out of there. It was a rout.
Yeah. One corporal from the 1st New Jersey told them, and this is his actual words, "I tell you, we followed them so close, they throw off everything and run, and we after them." It was like shooting rabbits.
I
they were
like-
running.
Because of how bad the grammar was, you gave a New Jersey man a southern
A
accent.
southern
know.
accent. Yeah.
In my little notes,
Jesus.
I put "sick" after that, which for anybody who reads historical documents, you know that means grammar bad.
I mean, if you think about it too, the 4th New Jersey Regiment on its own, and we know how important these colors were to these regiments, the regimental colors especially. We know how important they were to these regiments. I mean, at Gettysburg, the commander of the 16th Maine, he's been ordered to hold at all cost, and he tells his men to rip up the colors in each man to take a bit, and then he says every man for themselves, just because he does not want the Confederates to get a hold of their full colors in the flesh. So we know how important these flags are to these men, and the 4th New Jersey Regiment alone captures 2 stand of Confederate color.
Yeah.
That, if that is not a rout, I don't know what is.
Well, this was if and I'm not sure how true this is, but I read about it briefly. This may have been the first time forces under General Lee were actually militarily driven from the field.
Oh,
Was that this battle?
100%. I'll talk about it later, but this is the best showing, bar none, the Army of the Potomac has had up to that point in the war, period. This is the only time that they have actively pushed everything that Lee had out of this area.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyways, while the New Jerseyans are crossing the field, Newton starts after they're about 50 to 100 yards away, then Bartlett after that. Newton faces about the same amount of resistance as Torbert gets. Bartlett faces substantially more resistance on the his right, their left.
Bartlett's
he gets
just getting
into-
the short end of the stick this
Yeah,
entire
Bartlett,
time.
notably who has run out of ammunition at this point, has to get into a prolonged gunfight while the New Jerseyans are just having fun with the 12th and 16th Virginia Cav.
Fun.
Or I think they're Cav. And then
Emphasis on fun.
as all of this is happening, as everybody is starting to break in the first line, Cobb and his brigade shows up. And they are
Yes.
starting to form up as everybody is trying to break through them because they are running for their lives.
Now, just to put Cobb in a little bit more context, about the time when the attack starts is about the time when he gets the first dispatch that he needs to send support to Crampton's Gap. He actually gets one dispatch directly from Crampton's Gap itself, and originally he only forms 2 regiments, and he doesn't even plan to accompany those regiments to the Gap. He actually plans to have those 2 regiments commanded by the senior regimental commander. He's going to stay behind at their camp at Brownsville, and he gets another dispatch, this one, the one that you were talking about earlier, Adam, which says that he must hold the gap even if it costs the life of every man in his command. When he finally decides he's going to halt those 2 regiments, and they're about 10 miles down, not 10 miles, my bad, 10 minutes down the road at this point. He sends his aide de camp hurrying down the road to halt these 2 regiments. So he forms his other 2 regiments. They meet together on the road and then march as one column. So it's around the time when the attack starts, is around the time when Cobb starts to get these dispatches and couriers flooding in saying, hey, we need you guys at Crampton's Gap pronto.
Yeah. And then, as the reminder, this is a 400-yard sprint that they just did. Whenever the New Jerseyans finally do get up to the Confederate position and all of them have run off, they kind of sit behind their wall for a second and have a breather because they need like 5 minutes while the 1st and 2nd New Jersey behind them are kind of shooting over their shoulder to go and just recuperate from the fact that they just sprinted across this field. And then Cobb shows up. The New Jerseyans notice it. They have the entire brigade now within like a couple 100 feet. Like, they're all packed in on this little wall. And one of them just gets up, says, charge him, boys. Remember Manassas and remember Gaines Mill. And they just beeline sprint up this, like, actual full, like, hill straight into Cobb's now forming brigade.
That hill is steep, by the way.
Yeah.
I was about to say, they basically climb up a rock wall.
Yes, it is steep.
Sauce mentioned earlier, I believe, that like one of the guns broke. The reason that the gun broke is because the hill is so steep that whenever they fired the gun the first time, it didn't have any room to recoil. It broke the entire, like, oh god, what's it called? The wooden thing that the gun sits on. What is that called, Sauce? I know you know.
Actually, it escapes me. Give me too much credit, man.
Well, it broke the frame, like shattered the bolts on the frame of the gun. Like, that's how steep this hill is. It cannot, like, I don't know how they had other guns shooting, but that one certainly didn't work very well.
And this is about the time when you can address him as either one, Lieutenant or Adjutant Josiah Stuttaford is killed. Yeah. And it's a big reason why in the 4th New Jersey we did the Crampton's Gap reenactment, is because Josiah Stuttaford's death, not just for the 4th New Jersey, but the entirety of the 1st New Jersey Brigade, since he was also enacting aide de camp to General Taylor on the peninsula. Everybody knew his name. He was a very important person in the 1st New Jersey Brigade. Like I said, everybody knew his name. Everybody loved him. And it is actually, as Cobb is getting charged now by the 4th New Jersey Regiment, that he is killed instantly. Yeah. And what is interesting is that in Hatch's report, it actually says he was instantly killed after they had reached the gorge between the mountain cliffs. And in Cobb's report, we see that it says that a section of the troop artillery under Lieutenant Henry Jennings was ordered forward, and they were under a terrific fire, most likely from the 4th New Jersey or potentially the 3rd New Jersey on their right as they began to move down the gorge. And it was by their prompt and rapid firing that the enemy's advance was checked for a short time. And this section of guns, there's no other option of guns in the area. This section of guns under Lieutenant Jennings, they have to be the two guns that killed Josiah Studford.
Believe the strategy that they were using, because at this point Cobb's entire brigade had fallen back, so the only defense they had was these two guns, which, by the way, learned that those two guns, one was a 12-pounder howitzer named Ginny, and the other one was an 1841 6-pounder called Sally Craig. Apparently they actually named their guns.
That's fantastic.
But these two guns, they unlimbered whenever the Federals were about 100 yards away, and they, again, they're in the pass itself. They're just kind of sitting there watching them coming. They have to withdraw by recoil. So they get 3 shots off, 1 by Jenny and 2 by Sally Craig. And one of those 3 shots hit the 95th New York, 1 hit the 4th, and I think another hit the 95th, or did I say 95th New York? I meant 95th Pennsylvania. But 1 hit the Pennsylvanians, 1 hit the 4th, 1 hit the Pennsylvanians again. Jenny broke because, I think they threw a wheel or something. And, Sally Craig gets away, but one of those shots is the one that kills Josiah Studford. And each time those guns fired, that was the only stop that they had had since Cobb showed up. Every other moment of this battle, it's just the Union constantly advancing, and the guns firing is the only recoil that the Union lines had that day, since they basically started their charge. It's surprisingly effective, and the only reason they start falling back is they start doing a leapfrog thing with the 95th Pennsylvania, where they just keep kind of shooting in between bouts of the cannon firing. So it is just this kind of quick leapfroggy advance up the hill now. While the Rebs are just completely shattered, everybody is sprinting down the hill trying to get away from the Federals, because it is an entire route at this point. This command is decimated.
Yeah,
Cobb never recovered.
Yeah, it was pretty decimated. However, let's see. So Cobb kind of rallies his men. They eventually get pushed, and it's, despite it being a Union victory, to me, the Confederates got away with the upper hand. They got away with the upper hand because it allowed, because the CSA sort of react to this sort of series of battles. Because for the record, it wasn't just Crampton's Gap that was going on the 14th. There was other fights happening.
Yeah, up there, around Fox and Turner's, you have basically the rest of the Army of the Potomac smashing into everything that Longstreet had.
Yes,
and it's a bit of a slog, which honestly more people hear about that stuff because that's where the Iron Brigade gets their name. That's where Reno gets shot. That's where 2 presidents of the United States get their baptism by fire.
I was going to say, I know it's South Mountain
and Hayes.
Yes. Yeah. And again, it's something that kind of gets overshadowed by the bigger battle at Antietam, but is no less, I think, just as important as Antietam in many ways. But
this is McClellan's own words. It is the best showing of the Army of the Potomac to that point. It is the best thing that they have done.
Because we're kind of getting close to the end of the battle here, there's a story here that always has amused me ever since you told me about it, Fire. And that's what the 4th New Jersey does. Because we've established earlier in this podcast that the 4th New Jersey were armed with quote-unquote imperfect smoothbores. And apparently at the end of this battle, the 4th New Jersey dropped these imperfect smoothbores and grabbed whatever weapon that they could find from the fleeing Confederates, which apparently was mostly Enfields, if I read that correctly. If not, please correct me. But I was hoping you could possibly
that at some point. It's actually Springfields.
It is Springfields.
They got the rifled Springfields.
Yes.
Yeah.
Conveniently, they got the same model that they had before, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
But at the end of the battle, there are 418 casualties on the Union side, 18 of which are not from Slocum's division, and 400 of which are from Slocum's division. 113 dead, which is a fourth of the like casualties being deaths is a really high margin.
That is a high number. Yeah.
As opposed to the Confederates, where there are 400 uninjured prisoners, there are 317 wounded, and 150 dead. And of these, of that, they find and seize 700 Springfield rifled muskets that promptly William B. Hatch just kind of sees this pile of guns and is like, those are mine, and takes those and resupplies the entirety of like the 4th New Jersey with it.
As
or
he
basically the rest of the war.
Yeah.
There is a reason the men of the 4th New Jersey absolutely adored William Hatch.
I was going to say Hatch in the 4th New Jersey. The 4th New Jersey loved Hatch. There's a definite love relationship there between the men of the 4th and Hatch. I don't know if you could one of you could just kind of briefly touch on it. Don't go into too much details, but briefly.
To be honest, the 4th kind of just loved their commanders in general. They didn't like Kearny to start with because he was kind of a dick to them. Like, he really drilled them hard. But they liked Kearny as their brigade commander. They were absolutely devastated whenever they heard that Kearny died after Chantilly during the Second Manassas campaign. They would later be absolutely devastated when Hatch was killed at Fredericksburg, right?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't Hatch killed at Fredericksburg?
Hatch was killed at Fredericksburg. He would not live. Unfortunately, he would not live for too much longer after Crampton's Gap. And Crampton's Gap is it's also part of the reason that it lives on, so deeply in the memories of the veterans of the 1st New Jersey Brigade and especially the 4th New Jersey Regiment, is because it was essentially the last battle where Colonel Hatch would lead his regiment into combat from start to finish.
If I remember correctly, the 4th New Jersey, they didn't actually have their own colors at this point because they were seized by the Confederates at Gaines Mill. The state of New Jersey actually commissioned them a new set of national and regimental colors, one of which has an oil painting of Crampton's Gap, like a lithograph of it, on the colors, and that is the colors that they end the war with. We don't have it now as far as I've seen. But it was apparently something they were very proud of, as their conduct during Crampton's Gap.
The regiment's colors, they do exist, but they unfortunately do not exist in a
way where we could see what
condition.
They really look like.
Yeah, it's not.
It is tattered, to say the least.
Yes. Yeah, I'm honestly not really sure whether it's war damage or just the fact that it wasn't maintained very well over the last 150 some odd years. It's probably a little bit of both, but the colors, they do exist, just not in the same way they did during the Civil War. And unfortunately, we don't really know what it looks like except for testimony.
Yeah. But suffice it to say, they're absolutely in love with their commander right now. They really enjoy Hatch. He is the right level of being a very strong military commander, and also being not a dick, for lack of a better word.
Well, yeah. he was a very strict commander as well, but he was not in an unnecessary way. The men they understood that he cared about them, and that the things that he was strict about, he was strict about them for a reason. He was notably he was a very strict disciplinarian, and he was extremely strict when it came to drill. There was a period of time after Second Manassas where I believe the 4th New Jersey did drill at the battalion level 3 times a day for 2 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they kind of had to get back in shape after their long captivity of 3 or 4 months in Richmond.
Yep. Well, with that said, the aftermath of the battle itself, I think the CSA actually kind of came away with the upper hand here because, and some would blame this on that 3-hour delay. that initial slow advance that the Union was doing. But it allowed the Confederates to redeploy themselves, because I don't want to say withdraw, because they technically weren't withdrawing, but certainly redeploy themselves so that way they could reconnoiter and would eventually be able to fight at the Battle of Antietam itself. But how does the CSA kind of react to these series of battles? One, we have the fall of Harper's Ferry. Was that on September 14th or 15th? Did Harper's Ferry fall?
That was on the
next day.
15th.
Yeah.
It was.
It is on the
yeah.
night of the 14th that Jackson sends dispatch to Lee stating that
On the morrow, we will seize Harper's Ferry.
that
one
yes,
way
that
or
is
the
exactly what it says. Yep.
It's on the 14th that Miles sends Franklin a message saying, "If you're not here by tomorrow, I'm surrendering." And obviously, they couldn't get there. The fighting ended at Crampton's Gap at like 8 p.m. It is well past the point that they can actually do anything.
Yeah. And so we have
It's-
Jackson there. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Fire.
It's a classic case of tactical victory, strategic defeat. They couldn't do their objective of taking or relieving Harper's Ferry, I believe is the word that they would have used. But they did take the heights around Crampton's Gap.
And some people just, I don't really know, knowing what I do now, but it seems like a lot of blame, not necessarily from historians, but certainly people like on Reddit and stuff like that, seem to blame a lot of blame for the fact that Jackson was able to link with McClaw in the way that he did was because of that 3-hour delay. And I don't really know how exactly true that is, because I'm not quite sure what the disposition of Jackson was at this time when this battle, when all these battles for those gaps were being fought. But we do know for a fact that Jackson was able to link back up with McClaw, and then they would march together, kind of toward and join up with the rebel main body at Sharpsburg itself, which then they would fight at Antietam.
I wouldn't say that it's... Franklin definitely had his problems. I don't think he could have done any better.
No, I don't either.
If they actually did get through the gap earlier in the day and hit McClaw's rear, Jackson would have just showed up with basically the entirety of his corps and just absolutely wiped wiped Franklin from the field. Again, reminder, they had McClaw's had 2 divisions to Franklin's 3, and McClellan was not exactly happy with only having a third more troops than McClaw's did.
Yeah.
If Jackson showed up with his full corps, Franklin was dead. Like, absolutely no way in hell he could have gotten out of that. And losing the biggest of his corps is an absolute, like, travesty.
Yeah.
I don't think that it would have been better for anybody. And this way you have Franklin able to be one of the reserve corps during Antietam, just in case McClellan actually wanted to do anything with him. He didn't, but just in case.
Yeah, which whether he should or shouldn't have is a discussion for another day. But I think it was a pipe dream from the beginning, in my opinion. I'm being honest. I think that McClellan ordering and expecting that Franklin is gonna march the 3 miles to Jefferson, then march the 3 to 4 miles from Jefferson to Burkittsville, then take the gap, which is a mile itself from Burkittsville, and then march the I don't know, 4 or 5 miles from the gap to Harper's Ferry, all in one day, all when he knew and understood, he must have understood that the gap was going to be defended. And the gap certainly wasn't defended by as many troops as they thought it was defended by, but they didn't really need that many troops to defend it in the first place. And they surely showed that they didn't need that many troops to defend it.
I mean, as few troops as they had defending, it still held up Slocum's entire division. Like, they had to go and do a beeline straight into them to go and actually break them. They were fine for a while there. Like, I think that most historians put most of the blame on McClellan just for, like, even trying to put all of that on one corps commander. Like, Franklin technically might have been able to do it, but that would have been a real bad time for everybody involved.
I also do have a question for you guys, because Crampton's Gap isn't talked about very much. I kind of discovered while I was kind of reading about it. There's a lot of stuff. I've read stuff about Fox's Gap and Turner's Gap, and of course South Mountain itself. But Crampton's Gap seems to be the forgotten one of those fights. And I was going to pose to you guys as a question, why do you think that is, even though it was the first time any of Lee's army had been successfully driven from the field at that point. It was at Crampton's Gap. But why is it kind of overlooked? And I'm wondering if maybe it was more or less just because of what came next is why it's overlooked.
I think it's a little bit because of what came next. I also think more specifically, it's just about the fact that it didn't really change much. I mean, from the operational perspective, well, from the tactical perspective, Crampton's Gap is, wholeheartedly a Union victory. From the operational perspective, it's really a Confederate victory. The Confederates, they accomplish, what they want, which is to hold the gap until nightfall, to allow the two major parts of the army to reconnect. I mean, that's exactly what they wanted. Their troops got beat up in the process, but they knew that from the start. So operationally, it's a Confederate victory, and strategically, from the part of the whole campaign, or the broader strategic situation in the Eastern Theater, does what happened at Crampton's Gap change very much? I think the answer to that question is, what would have happened if Franklin never attacked Crampton's Gap? And I think the answer to that question is just about what happened in real life. Just with less dying.
Yeah, 150 more rebels later on, and a few hundred more, like, unwounded rebels and uncaptured rebels. It's basically the exact same thing that happened anyways.
Yeah, and I mean, I think Crampton's Gap is important, and I personally have a lot of enthusiastic love for the history of Crampton's Gap. But that's a personal thing, and it goes back to this connection that I have through War of Rights and our organization, the 4th New Jersey Volunteers. It really has more to do with that rather than the strategic or operational importance of the engagement. I think Crampton's Gap is important in the sense that I don't think you can truly tell the story of the entirety of the Maryland campaign without it. I think if you want to understand what McClellan's thoughts are when he finds Special Orders 191 and starts moving troops around, the fact that the entire point of the 6th Corps going to take the Gap and then marching to Harper's Ferry and cutting off Jackson from linking up with the rest of Lee's army, that's the entire point. And I think knowing that is important in order to understand why things happen the way they happen and what the two commanders were thinking at the time. But in terms of the fighting, it didn't really change much. In many ways, the attack at Crampton's Gap was a whole lot of fighting for a whole lot of nothing.
I'd also like to add, just like I mentioned before, I think that most of the attention goes to the rest of South Mountain and then later to Antietam. One, because there's just kind of a bit more drama at those two. Like, you have a general die at the northern side of the South Mountain battlefield. You have a bunch of stuff going on at Antietam. We're not even going to mention that part.
No.
But you also have the naming of the Iron Brigade, their entire push. And then you have the two presidents again. I think a lot of the reason why more attention goes to the rest of South Mountain and then, other stuff outside of Crampton's Gap is just because there's just more people involved in the other ones and more.
They're cooler, guys. The other battles are cooler.
I honestly think I don't think they're cooler personally, but I honestly think
I
that
mean,
is
is the
why
is
they
the
get
push
more
of the
attention.
Iron
Yeah.
Brigade any more cool than the push of the entirety of Slocum's division?
It's
that is a
it's
bayonet
really
charge, and the Iron Brigade's over there just doing like fire by wing.
yeah. Which granted, they did it in a pretty cool way, but
It's a beautiful dance. I would argue it was a dance. It was the most beautiful ballet I've ever seen or that I've ever read
did
about.
you? Oh, you
Speaking of
saw
which,
it? You were there?
I was there.
Speaking
Yeah.
of which, funny you should say those lines. Franklin, whenever he wrote about the Battle of Crampton's Gap to his wife, said it is one of the prettiest fights of the war I arranged, and I arranged the details of it myself. It is actually literally the prettiest thing he ever saw while he was fighting.
Right.
It's just so funny that he said that. Which, casual reminder, he said I arranged the details of it myself. He did almost nothing during
He
that
basically
entire
did nothing
fighting.
the whole time. Fantastic job taking credit for Newton, Bartlett, and Torbert.
Slocum did the same thing. At least Slocum had the foresight to go and promote all of his brigade commanders to brigadier generals after the fighting at Crampton's Gap, so at least they got some benefit out of it. But like Franklin took full credit for this thing that he basically did nothing.
I was gonna say Franklin didn't do
When I say he
anything.
did nothing, it's so far down. He didn't even choose if they were going to attack on the north or the south. That was Bartlett who made that decision. They didn't decide how they were going to advance in. That was Bartlett's decision. They didn't even decide if they were going to engage. That was Cake's decision.
Well,
his headquarters was more than a mile away from even Burkittsville.
That's just it. It was quite a ways away. I've actually seen the house. It is quite
is it actually
away.
that house on that corner? I was wondering if it was whenever we were looking on Google Maps last night.
Yeah, can I remember the name of the house? No, but that is the historical
the
house
one with
and
the
it is
red
still
barn.
there. Yeah. It's still there.
Apparently, it's called the Hamilton Willard Shaford Farm.
Yes, the Shaford. Yes. Yep.
It's a lot of names.
They've had some owners in the past, I guess.
Apparently. Well, gentlemen, unless you guys have anything else you would like to discuss before I wrap this up, but I thought this was a wonderful podcast. It was definitely, I learned a lot listening to you two, and it was fun kind of curating this conversation about a battle a lot of people don't know about.
It was fun. I had a blast, man.
I would love to do more of these for random battles fought throughout the Civil War as well.
We're going to have the 17-hour straight Gettysburg one.
Oh my god. Oh no.
I can make it happen. I've got the platform to do it.
Bits and pieces, please. Let's do it over multiple days.
Part 8 of Gettysburg.
Yeah. Well, gentlemen, Fire, Sauce, thank you so much for joining me on this. In the description of this podcast, you'll find a link to where, if you're interested in playing War of Rights or whatever, the link will take you to our Discord, or to the 4th New Jersey's Discord, where you could join and hopefully fight alongside the 4th New Jersey in this silly game, or as I like to call it, reenacting for poor people.
Very poor people.
Not even that wrong is the worst part.
One reason why I started playing. Anyways, again, thank you so much for listening. More history content like this will be coming out soon. I try to get at least one big history video out on this channel a month. So again, thank you very much. All of our social media is available in the description below. And in the end, this is Adam Noyce of AN Productions. I was joined by Fire and Sauce. Everyone, take care.
Good evening.